Welcome to TM News. Russia's laser weapon claim derided as propaganda. Russia claims to have used laser weapons on the battlefield in Ukraine, although the US says it has seen no evidence of this and Ukraine has derided it as propaganda. What are laser weapons and how effective could they be in the conflict? Yuri Borisov, the deputy prime minister in charge of military development, told Russian TV that a laser prototype called Sadra was being deployed in Ukraine and had burned up a Ukrainian drone within 5 seconds at a distance of 5 kilometers. This was in addition to a previous laser system called Prasvit, named after a medieval Orthodox warrior monk, which could be used to dazzle satellites orbiting high above Earth and prevent them from gathering information. If Prasvit blinds, then the new generation of laser weapons lead to the physical destruction of the target. Thermal destruction, they burn up, Mr. Borisov said. However, an official with the U.S. Department of Defense said he had not seen anything to corroborate reports of lasers being used in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky mocked the Russian claim, comparing it to the so-called wonder weapons that Nazi Germany claimed to be developing during World War II. The clearer it became that they had no chance in the war, the more propaganda there was about an amazing weapon that would be so powerful as to ensure a turning point, he said in a video address. And so we see that in the third month of a full-scale war, Russia is trying to find its wonder weapon. This all clearly shows the complete failure of the mission. What laser weapons can, and can't, do. Little is known about the Sadra laser program, but in 2017 Russian media said state nuclear corporation Rosatom had helped develop it as part of a program to create weapons based on new physical principles, news agency Reuters reported. But there is at least one country which has developed a laser weapon: is Israel. It released video last month showing a laser system shooting down rockets and drones. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said it could shoot down drones, mortars and rockets for just $3.50 a shot. It may sound like science fiction, but it's real, he said. But missile defense expert Dr. Uzi Rubin from the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security said laser weapon technology would not alter the balance of power on the battlefield in Ukraine. Zelensky is right, it's no wonder weapon, he told the BBC. It took them several seconds to shoot the UAV down. There are much better ways to do it. To use a Stinger or any anti-aircraft missile would have been cheaper, faster and longer range. Lasers work by sending out a beam of infrared light that heats up its target until it combusts. Dr. Rubin said the power of even advanced laser weapons was still too weak to make a significant difference on the battlefield, and such weapons had a low kill rate. It's not like in Star Wars where they point a laser gun at the bad guys and quickly push a button and the bad guy explodes. In reality, it's more like a mere microwave oven. If you want to make a cup of water boil, it takes some time. The laser is the same. You need to put it on the target and wait until it heats up and destroys it, he said. The laser can only focus on one target at a time, Dr. Rubin said, while missile defense systems can engage multiple incoming targets simultaneously. Additionally, lasers are neutralized by bad weather because they don't work in rain or snow and cannot penetrate cloud. What is a thermobaric or vacuum bomb? In maps, Russian momentum slows in east. However, Israel's Iron Beam does have a rationale, he said, but mainly as a way of saving money. Israel's expensive Iron Dome interceptor missiles are designed to protect major cities from incoming missiles, rather than mortar rounds or drones. Missile warfare is a war of resources. It's cheaper to make the rockets than to defend against them. So whatever you can do to reduce the costs of defending is useful, he said. Energy weapons can be useful in reducing costs, but it's not going to make a revolution. Additionally, Russia could use lasers on the battlefield to blind Ukrainian soldiers, retired Australian Army Major General Mick Ryan told The Washington Post, although this is banned under a 1995 protocol added to the Union Treaty that prohibits weapons causing excessive injury or having indiscriminate impact. Russia, the US, UK and others are signatories to the protocol. Ukraine war in maps, Tracking the Russian invasion, Russian forces are continuing to focus their attacks on the east of the country, but resistance from Ukrainian troops is slowing their progress. Here are the latest developments. Strong Ukrainian defenses in Donbas region holding for now. Russian forces pushed out further from second city Kharkiv. Ongoing bombardment of Mariupol factory by Russian forces. Belarus deploys some forces near Ukraine border. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, but Ukrainian forces retook large areas around the capital Kiev in early April after Russia abandoned its push towards Kiev. Following the withdrawal from the north of Ukraine, Russia has refocused its efforts on taking control of the east and south of the country. Belarus' recent deployment of forces along the Ukraine's northern border is likely to fix Ukrainian troops in the area, preventing their deployment in the Donbas, according to the UK Ministry of Defense. Russian losses mount in eastern offensive. Russian officials have said its forces are fighting for the complete liberation of the Donbas, which broadly refers to Ukraine's eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, where Russian-backed separatists held significant territory before the invasion. Russian forces have been making slow progress in the east, with the capture of Rubizny and Popasna in recent weeks. But their advances around Izium have been repelled, and they appear to be focusing on trying to encircle Severodonetsk, according to the Institute for the Study of War. A successful attack by Ukrainian forces on Russian troops last week destroyed nearly all of a Russian battalion's armored vehicles while they were attempting to cross the Seversky Donets River. According to the UK MOD, Russia has now likely suffered losses of one-third of the ground forces it committed in February. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces are continuing attempts to push Russian troops back from Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, with some reports indicating that parts of the Ukrainian counteroffensive have reached the Ukraine-Russia border. The ISW reports that Russian forces are likely to withdraw from the area, only attempting to defend supply lines further east from Kharkiv. War in Ukraine, more coverage. On the ground, the children's camp that became an execution ground front line, Russia's invasion not going to plan, NATO says. Kherson, how is Russia imposing its rule in occupied Ukraine? Read more. Full coverage of the crisis. Russia targets full control of South. Russian forces initially made rapid gains in the south, with their main objective being the creation of a land corridor between Crimea, which it annexed in 2014, and areas held by Russian-backed separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk. But strong resistance from Ukrainian forces near Mykolaiv in the west and in Mariupol in the east significantly slowed Russian advances. The port city of Mariupol, which has been encircled since the start of March, is now mostly under the control of Russian forces. Several hundred Ukrainian troops remain holed up in the Azovstal metal works factory in the south of the city, with Russian forces continuing attempts to take control of the sprawling industrial complex. To the west, Russia had aimed to take control of Odessa and cut off Ukraine's access to the Black Sea, but its forces were blocked by a staunch defense in Mykolaiv and forced back towards Kherson by a Ukrainian counteroffensive in March. Russian forces are now fortifying defensive positions by digging trenches stretching for tens of miles and building concrete structures across the southern areas of Ukraine under their control, according to the ISW. In the Black Sea, Russia is continuing efforts to reinforce its troops on Snake Island despite successful airstrikes by Ukrainian aviation last week. The roughly 16-hectare rocky outpost is owned by Ukraine but was taken over by Russian forces in February. Control over the island has become more important following the sinking of the Russian flagship Moskva in April. By David Brown, Bella Hurrell, Dominic Bailey, Mike Hills, Lucy Rogers, Paul Sargent, Alison Trousdale, Turul Ahmedzaid, Mark Bryson, Zoe Bartholomew, Sean Wilmot, Sana Dionysiou, Joy Roxas, Gary Fletcher, Jana Toskinsk, D.B. Loizu, and Prina Shah. To indicate which parts of Ukraine are under control by Russian troops, we are using daily assessments published by the Institute for the Study of War with the American Enterprise Institute's Critical Threats Project. To show key areas where advances are taking place, we are also using daily updates from the UK Ministry of Defence and BBC Research. The situation in Ukraine is fast-moving and it is likely there will be times when there have been changes not reflected in the maps. New members joining NATO is not a threat. Biden. A little more from President Biden, as he holds a joint press conference with Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson and Finnish President Sauli Niinisto. He assures the two countries their NATO applications have the full, complete backing of the U.S. He says reports have gone to the UK Congress today so the upper house of politicians, the Senate, can move towards approving them. He stresses the defensive nature of NATO. New members joining NATO is not a threat to any nation, it never has been, he says. NATO will be enhanced for all time by Sweden and Finland joining, he says. Ukrainians return home despite war continuing. More than 1 million Ukrainian refugees have returned home after being frustrated with the growing discomfort, the growing struggle with different systems around the European Union, Ukraine's ambassador to the UK has said. Vadim Pristaiko told an event in Westminster that Ukrainian refugees are missing their loved ones, they're missing their homes, they're missing their jobs. He added that the mayors of Kiev and Kharkiv told people not to return to the cities as it was still unsafe. One of the things I'd like to address is how we can still be able to hold them here somewhere in Europe, the European Union, sometimes across the pond in Canada and the United States, Pristaiko said. Do you repent your crime? Widow asks Russian soldier. As we've been hearing, the war crime trial of Vadim Shishimarin has resumed in Kiev. The 21-year-old Russian tank commander has admitted killing Alexander Shilipov, a 62-year-old civilian. According to prosecutors, Shishimarin was ordered to kill Shilipov and used a Kalashnikov assault rifle to do so. Katerina Shilipov, the widow of the man he killed, stood up in court and asked the soldier if he repented his crime. Shishimarin admitted his guilt and apologized to Shilipov. Watch the video above to see the exchange in court. It feels as if the defendant has been abandoned by Russia. The soldier's lawyer, who was appointed by the Ukrainian state, has told me that no Russian official has been in touch with him, including from the defense ministry. There is no Russian embassy in Kiev these days, so no contact from there either. President Vladimir Putin's spokesman told the BBC on Wednesday that the Kremlin has no information about this case. All in all, it feels rather like the young soldier has been abandoned to his fate by the commanders who sent him to war and continue to deny that their forces commit crimes here. This trial is Ukraine's chance to prove, beyond doubt, that a Russian soldier killed a civilian with no regard for the rules of war. It knows it's in the spotlight, doing this so quickly and in the middle of a war, and it's keen to be as transparent and thorough as possible, so that this is not seen as a show trial, but part of a vital quest for justice. Witnesses were returned to Russia in secret prisoner exchange. Vadim Shishimarin's lawyer asked the court to call 2 more witnesses, the other soldiers who were in the car when Shishimarin killed Alexander Shilipov through the open back window. He then learned, for the first time, that those 2 soldiers had been returned to Russia in a prisoner exchange that was not made public. These swaps happen periodically, with the names negotiated by both sides. It's not clear why Ivan Maltisev, who was also captured, was not included in the swap but instead stayed in Ukraine to give evidence against his fellow soldier. Judges shown soldiers' rifles as evidence. The prosecution have brought several rifles into court as part of their evidence, in a white sack, and have been handing them to the panel of 3 judges to examine. Remember, Vadim Shishimarin, the soldier on trial here, and Ivan Maltisev both surrendered with their weapons. The prosecutor asks Shishimarin if he recognizes his gun and he replies, yes. The number on it also matches the one he gave previously. The mobile phone of the man killed, Alexander Shilipov, was also examined, so far only to prove that it belonged to him. Russian soldier was ordered to kill civilian. Trial. Here's the trial of Vadim Shishimarin has resumed in Kiev after a short break. The 21-year-old Russian tank commander has admitted the killing of a 62-year-old civilian. Earlier, we heard from a second Russian soldier who witnessed the killing in February and later surrendered to Ukrainian forces. Ivan Maltisev, another very slim, young-looking 21-year-old, told the court how the Russians had been forced to retreat on foot with their wounded after their column of tanks came under attack. When a civilian car approached, the Russians opened fire on it straight on and, according to MultiSafe, they then took over the vehicle. About 500 meters further on, the soldiers spotted Alexander Shalapov, the victim. He was either on the phone or getting it out, I don't remember which, MultiSafe said, adding that he does remember that Vadim Shishimarin was ordered to shoot. Vadim didn't do it. So the soldier, whose name I don't know, turned round in the car and shouted that Vadim had to carry out the order, or we would be informed on. At this point, we were almost alongside the civilian and, under pressure, Vadim fired. He fired 3 or 4 rounds. Azovstal wounded carried on stretchers. Russian media are reporting that large numbers of Ukrainian fighters are still inside the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. Drone footage posted on social media shows people on stretchers being carried away from the steelworks earlier this week. The BBC can't independently verify the date on which the images were recorded. Ukrainians don embroidered shirts for Vyshyvanka Day. On a lighter note, Ukraine is marking Vyshyvanka Day today, a celebration of the traditional Ukrainian embroidered shirt. It is one of the best-known symbols of Ukrainian culture, with roots reaching back several centuries. Classic Vyshyvankas boast exquisite, usually floral, patterns down the middle of the front. Some of these patterns carry a meaning of their own, such as hope, love, chastity, fertility, protection against disease or the evil eye. Different Ukrainian regions have patterns peculiar to them. The original Vyshyvanka is white, but now they are available in almost any color imaginable. Today, President Volodymyr Zelensky posted a tweet describing the Vyshyvanka as a holy protective amulet in the war with Russia. He also tweeted a video of himself wearing the Vyshyvanka. Russian soldier confronted by widow in war crimes trial. The trial of Vadim Shishimarin began today with a powerful encounter between the Russian tank commander and the widow of the man he killed. Katerina Shalapova stood up in court and asked the 21-year-old what he had felt when he killed her husband Alexander, and did he repent his crime. The soldier replied that he admitted his guilt and asked for her forgiveness. "But I understand you won't be able to forgive me," he added. Katerina Shalapova hadn't finished. "Tell me please, why did you come here?" "To protect us," she asked, citing Vladimir Putin's justification for the invasion of Ukraine. "Protect us from whom? Did you protect me from my husband, whom you killed?" The soldier had no answer to that. Perhaps such raw encounters are what such war crimes trials are about, at least in part. Forcing a soldier, who ignored all the rules of war, to face up to exactly what he has done and the pain he has caused. Yesterday, Katerina told me she actually felt sorry for him, but she could not forgive him for this crime. She heard the shots that killed her husband, then saw Sgt Shishimarin through her gate, holding his weapon. A little later she found Alexander's body in the street. "The loss of my husband is everything for me," Katerina said, adding, "he was my protector." Vadim Shishimarin claims that he hadn't wanted to fire the fatal shots, that he was following orders, threatened by another soldier, if he refused to do as he was told. Will those still trapped fight or surrender? There are conflicting reports about the number of fighters who have surrendered from the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol, and confusion too about how many remain inside. Russia has just said another 771 have left, taking the total to 1,730. But numbers have always been a bit uncertain in the battle for this strategically crucial southern port. Until recently there were said to have been 2,000 Ukrainian fighters holding out. If we take the Russian claim of the total who have surrendered, that could mean a few hundred are still inside the labyrinthine tunnels of the steel plant. Indeed, pro-Russian media have said the leaders of the Azov battalion are yet to surrender. This controversial unit of the Ukrainian armed forces is a bête noire of the Russians, featuring prominently in Kremlin propaganda. Russia accuses them of being Nazis, something Ukraine has always denied. Meanwhile, some Russian lawmakers have said they should be treated as war criminals rather than prisoners of war. Vyacheslav Volodin, the Speaker of the Duma, Russia's parliament, said Nazi criminals should not be exchanged. One prominent MP even said the death penalty should be reintroduced to deal with them. Leonid Slutsky, who had previously taken part in negotiations with Ukraine, called them animals in human form. Given this context, it may be that surrender becomes an increasingly less attractive offer for who remain. The question is, what do they plan to do instead? UK introducing new sanctions against Russian airlines. Truss Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has said the UK will introduce fresh sanctions to stop state-owned Russian airlines Aeroflot, Ural Airlines and Rossiya Airlines from selling their unused landing slots at British airports, Reuters reports. Truss says the UK has already closed its airspace to Russian airlines but will be making sure they can't cash in their lucrative landing slots at our airports. The UK government has said it estimates the landing slots are worth £50 million, according to Reuters. Global situation changed radically by NATO expansion. Russia. We have more reaction from Moscow, which has previously said that NATO's expansion would be a mistake. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has said Finland and Sweden choosing to join NATO would have far-reaching consequences, Russian news agencies report. He also said he saw the global situation changing radically as a result of the move. Ryabkov said Finland and Sweden should have no illusions that Russia will simply put up with their decision, Interfax reports. Ukrainian troops defending Kharkiv reach Russian border. Governor Ukrainian troops defending the northern city of Kharkiv have reached the state border with Russia, the regional governor said on Monday. Governor Oleh Sinagubov made the claims on the Telegram messaging service. It is not yet possible to verify the claims and it's not immediately clear how many troops had reached the Russian border and where. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry has published a video purportedly showing a number of soldiers from a territorial defense brigade at an unspecified location on the frontier. "We have arrived, we are here," one of the soldiers says. Ukraine has been driving Russian forces away from Kharkiv, the second-largest Ukrainian city. Ukraine war, Russia pushed back from Kharkiv. Report from Frontline Ukraine says its forces have recaptured villages from Russian troops north and northeast of Kharkiv, pushing them back towards the border. The continuing offensive could signal a shift in the war's momentum and jeopardize Russia's main advance further south. BBC correspondent Quinton Somerville and cameraman Darren Conway have been with Ukrainian forces as they advance. Short presentational gray line. The village of Ruska Lazova stands at the center of the turn in Ukraine's response to Russian aggression. It was recently liberated in a coordinated effort led by senior military commanders. Ukrainian troops from Territorial Defense, the National Guard and the regular army are seeking to push the Russians back along a 32 km front line. In the Russian city of Belgorod, just across the border, troops have amassed for a likely counteroffensive. "We drove north from the city of Kharkiv with Ukrainian forces. Russian shells continued to hit the village. With no power or water, little food, and neither phone or internet, its residents had been isolated from Ukraine's second-largest city, just 8 kilometers south. From the woods and hills nearby, Russian mortars and artillery shelled Kharkiv relentlessly. At an army aid station, we met Raisa Opanasivna, who has lived in Ruska Lazova for 30 years. The 66-year-old approached the Ukrainian soldiers, weighed down by history, and 2 large plastic shopping bags. Under a knitted gray beanie, her gaunt face was weather-beaten, her slim frame stooped. She hadn't seen this many people for months. Since the beginning of the war, her village had been under Russian occupation. The Russians had come house to house. They were checking homes, asking if we have rifles. "But I have nothing. I'm alone," Raisa said. Ruska Lazova has been torn apart, but more than that, Raisa's whole world had been upended by Russia's invasion. In the east, the war is bringing not just a re-examination of people's relationship to Russia, barely 30 kilometers north, but a more personal reassessment of what it means to be a Russian-speaking Ukrainian. A month ago, the Russians were literally at the gates to Kharkiv. The shelling was constant, and buildings in the street we were staying in were being hit. It became so bad that it was easier to count the hours of silence than the hours of explosions. It felt like being on the edge of an abyss, where one more concerted Russian attack could rupture the city. In the northern Saltivka neighborhood, entire apartment blocks had been destroyed. Those who had stayed behind had no electricity or water, and were reduced to cooking food on small fires they had made in their stairwells. But the specter of Russian victory, which haunted this city, has gone. Last week I sat in a city center park, its grass neatly cut, its flower beds blooming, and enjoyed an ice cream sundae from a cafe. The city is still largely empty, but the number of Russian artillery strikes has fallen from dozens daily to only a handful. Air raid sirens still wail regularly, but Kharkiv no longer feels on the brink of catastrophe. Ukrainian gains, modest for now, could have strategic implications for Russia's war in the Donbass to the southeast, threatening the invaders' supply lines. As we headed north from Kharkiv with Ukrainian forces to villages and towns that marked the new front line, the road remained strewn with craters and spent Russian rockets. At the highway's edges there were destroyed Russian vehicles and burned-out lorries, which had been used to block their initial attack on Kharkiv. We drove at speed. The commander of a volunteer unit behind the wheel had his rifle propped in the footwell. "The sides of the road are mined," he said, as the car lurched through a chicane of roadblocks and tank traps. Ours was the only car on the road, and we were aware that, on the forested hill in front of us, Russian tanks and artillery were still roaming. War in the Kharkiv region has changed. It's now a game of hawk and mouse, where each side's drones circle constantly, trying to pinpoint the enemy's tanks and guns, for targeting by artillery. We passed a Russian Grad rocket launcher lying in a ditch, and a smashed-up military green Lada, with the Russian Z insignia painted white on its doors. "Russia's secret weapon," the commander said, to laughter among his men. Near Ruska Lazova, scorch marks on the road were all that remained of a civilian vehicle destroyed by a Russian shell. The wreck was gone, but its contents were spilled across the road, a pink blanket here, some clothing there. A number of people were killed in the strike. The village shows the effects of the battle for control. Homes have been wrecked by shelling and some buildings still burn. One house we passed had a shattered roof, while bright red tulips lined up in an orderly fashion at its gate. The battle has become more fluid, and the men don't linger in the open. They run across open ground at speed and climb walls to avoid Russian fire from the woods, less than half a kilometer away. They believe Russian fighters have left, and it's mostly men from the separatist Donbass region they are fighting. But the day after we left, more Russians were captured near the front. We had to take cover suddenly in a foxhole, their first line against the enemy as the Russian artillery again opened fire and shells whizzed overhead. They landed on the other side of the village seconds later. At an anti-tank position, us supplied Javelin anti-tank missiles, along with their British-supplied versions, lay ready for use. Manning this lookout were two volunteers, who replied to me in French. They are Ukrainian, but joined the French Foreign Legion. One told me that he'd been serving for 3 years, but had deserted to join the fight for Ukraine. That is perhaps a weapon Russia underestimated, the force of Ukrainian solidarity. Even before Western military aid began arriving here, this was what anchored Ukraine's defenses. Among the group of volunteers are an economist, a businessman, a mechanic, and a rally-driving champion. I met the commander before Victory Day on May 9, which Russia and Ukraine celebrate as the Soviet Union's defeat over Germany's Nazi regime during World War II, and asked him what it meant this year. He feels it has been tainted. "I was born in the Soviet Union," he continues, sipping on some freshly brewed tea. "Russians, to my regret, use everything as weapons. Our common dates, our common language, our common religion. Russia doesn't hesitate to use all means. That is why everybody here now hates the Russian language, even Russian poet Alexander Pushkin is persona non grata. That is why our church is split, and everything which is Russian will be renamed here. Few people remain in the town of Ruska-Losava. Raisa, in her gray coat and woolen hat, approached army medics, numb to the shelling around her, and the wounds it had inflicted upon her body. Her face was peppered with shrapnel and half of her finger was missing. When she removed her jacket, her slim arm was sliced open at the bicep. Cut like a chicken fillet. Can you remove the shrapnel? Raisa asks. Perhaps it was because she hadn't seen people for months, or because of a stroke last year, but she has only just regained the ability to talk. Her story began to pour out. A group of soldiers gathered around her. When I was giving birth, there were 3 of us mothers. I was in the middle. They were screaming. I was calm. I took a strap from the shirt to my mouth. The doctor told me to scream, but I said it doesn't matter if you are screaming or not. It's still painful. That's how I gave birth to my son. Quietly. The men around her were wincing as she told them to cut off the loose skin with scissors. One soldier looked queasy as the medic patched her up. As it was happening, she reflected on the fate of her village and of an empire she had seen disintegrate, her home and her history in ruins. She lived through the Soviet Union at a time when Russia and Ukraine were countries intertwined. For years, she lived in East Germany, where she became pregnant, and returned to Ukraine to give birth alone. My father and father were fighting together against Hitler, right? Could that really be possible? And now we fight against each other, she told us. The closest nations. This has never happened before. There were German invaders and now these are our people. After being bandaged up, Raisa was escorted to a waiting car, to take her to hospital in Kharkiv. Most of the people in the village are being evacuated, buses waiting to transport those without cars. The Russian occupation has torn the village apart, both literally and figuratively. In the basement of one building, half a dozen locals have been detained. They are suspected of aiding the enemy. Their eyes are covered with balaclavas taped over their heads, their hands tied. At least one woman is among them. They are left alone in a room, then taken away to the security services for questioning. Their phones will be checked and their social media, too. Police checkpoints on the road into Kharkiv question everyone coming from the liberated areas, looking for saboteurs. Collaborators face 15 years in prison, or a life imprisonment if their actions caused Ukrainian deaths. It's unlikely Raisa can ever forgive Russia for the wounds she has suffered. And with every battle, the men on the front line are freeing themselves from the bindings that once held these two nations together. But the operation north of Kharkiv isn't complete and it has been costly. It is only one front in what looks as though it will be a long war.